Okay, hello everybody. Hello for this Zube lecture. Zube lecture has been is founded by endowment by Zube and his wife, and we always have great talks and great presenters like today that Michael Di Pasquale will introduce soon. And I just want to, I'm organizing this lecture series thanks to Nathan and Stacy Steinward. And I will just give a short a view of the next week. The next week we have Neil Diboli, and he's the president of Prairie Nursery. So he's probably talking about plants, I guess. And he's talking about the American garden, a life or death situation. So keep tuned and stay on board and join us for next lecture, but also, of course, enjoy this lecture. My name is Frank Sligas, Associate Professor of Landscape Architecture, and I give it over to Michael Di Pasquale.
Thank you, Frank. I want to again give a special welcome to the students in the Peril and Promise COVID-19 class who are joining us today. Glad to have everybody here. I thought I better start talking because Dwayne was about to introduce himself. So I'm really happy to introduce today's Zube speaker, Dr. Dwane Jones. As Dwayne said, he's the acting dean of the University of District of Columbia, College of Agriculture, Urban Sustainability, and Environmental Sciences. I think the acronym it's a cool one, CAUSES. Like UMass, University of District of Columbia is a land-grant university, but it has the distinction of being the only urban-based land-grant university in the country. And I've seen the campus, and it is it's urban, and but it's a great spot in Washington D.C. So it's a special place. I just wanted to point out a couple of Dwayne's accomplishments that I think are particularly noteworthy. Of course, he's had I wouldn't say not a long career, but a good long career. When he was in North Carolina, the University of North Carolina State University, I guess I should say, he founded the Low Impact Development Certification Program, which is something we're talking about in all different ways here at UMass. But the Low Impact Development one in North Carolina is a model for other programs like that that deal with green infrastructure and sustainability. He's also in Washington because of their location and being right in the city. I've taken a tour actually of some of the work they've done around the campus in different neighborhoods. And Dwayne has spearheaded a range of those initiatives related to agriculture, urban farming, and healthy cities. And some really cool things. I hope he gets to talk about some of them. But most importantly, I think, Dwayne has worked and studied and taught around the subject of leadership. And he's recently created a PhD program in leadership and entrepreneurship. And that's how I know Dwayne. He practices what he preaches. Dwayne is the kind of person that motivates people. He draws people in. He's kind, he's totally generous, lots of fun to be with. He definitely brings out the best in people. And I've had the opportunity to be around him and to feel all that energy. So Dwayne, thanks so much for being with us today. Really nice to have you with us. It's all yours now.
Okay, thank you, Michael. That was a great introduction. And Michael, the feeling is mutual. I feel the same about you. I often think that if it was legal to adopt an adult, I would adopt you, but I think it's called kidnapping once you're an adult. Great to connect with everyone. I am Dwayne Jones, as Michael stated, and great to see older colleagues as well, at least some that I've seen recently, which is Robert and others. Great to connect and meet with the new ones. And for you that are joining that I have not met before, it's great to engage with you as well. The presentation will be a little different today, and as you saw during the introduction and the title, really the lecture is on facing COVID and resilience. And I know that today is filled with lots of problems, and we're going to discuss that. But ultimately, what I'd like to get at is solutions, and how do we actually go through a process to develop solutions to address problems. I think many of us are cognizant of what the problems are, but I don't hear a lot of discussions about how we can develop and create solutions. And in my career, I often reflect on where I am and what I've done and how I've gotten to certain places. And many times I don't really have a clear direction when I'm in the moment as to how I got to where I am. But then in times of reflections, I'll look back and say, that's interesting. I didn't know I had that characteristic, or I had that approach, or I really didn't know that I had that ability back then. But looking towards where we are now and where I am now, I do much more reflection now. I read a book recently, and the premise was from success to significance. And the premise of the book basically said, when you're in your early 20s and 30s, your goal is to build success, to create success. And then somewhere in your 40s, success sort of becomes, how do I create significance? Which I've crossed that line. Believe it or not, Michael and others, I actually joined AARP 2 weeks ago. Not as a joke. I really joined. I actually
I
AARP.
don't believe it. I don't
It is
believe
true. I could show you my membership card. The American Association of Retired Persons. Now, I'm not near retirement, but I actually found some articles and benefits they have that I said, okay, they keep sending me these invitation letters saying, Dwayne Jones, you're at a certain age now, join the AARP. And I say, okay, well, for $9 a year, I'm willing to see what this is about. And so, anyway, going back to success, from success to significance. The significance piece basically means, how do I make a difference where I am? How do I make a difference in the environment that I'm in right now? And that's important because we live in a time period that, 2020 has been a unique year, and one that is quite memorable. And as I pondered the question, how do I sort of move from success to significance, but at the same time, I still want to be successful, but also to make an impact ultimately. Ultimately, I think much of my own personal success and success of others can hinge on this question, and I'll show you some visual aids in just a moment. But this is the question I want everyone to follow. And if you have pen and paper, or if you're like me, pencil and paper, you will need that, because there'll be some exercises that I'll ask you to work through. And the question is as follows: how can I be an answer to a problem? How can I be an answer to a problem? And so, just from a personal perspective, when I began my career as an intern, there are certain characteristics that I had 20 years ago that I really didn't know that they were significant or important, or characteristics that helped me to achieve certain goals. And I'll just give you some of them that still carry on today. One is, as an intern, at that particular time, I worked in a city planning department in an unpaid position, and the official office hours were 8 a.m. to 5 a.m. I have always been a morning person, and this is not telling you that you need to be, but I am a morning person. I am awake and going by 4:10 a.m. 7 days a week, and 3 a.m. is my ideal, and I usually go to sleep at around 10 or 11. But the point of me telling you this is, in those early days as an intern, I would get to work early and I would leave late, and not everyone can do that, but I would get to work at 7:30, make coffee, set everything up. And by the time people arrived at 8 a.m., everything was set up and ready to go. I always looked for ways in which I could find gaps and find issues and challenges, and to determine how I could insert myself with my experience into those gaps and challenges, to determine how we could best move forward. Now, remember, we're talking about resilience and ultimately problem solving and becoming an answer to a problem. And from an intern, I became that company, that city planning department actually created a position for me, one that did not exist heretofore. They created a position for me, and I stayed in that position for 5 years, and then I was recruited to um, become an extension professor at North Carolina State University. And they recruited me because I developed a niche in the planning world, in environmental planning primarily, that really didn't exist, because I saw there was a problem and that there was a place that I could fill that no one else was filling. And so I stepped in and began to do that and won some awards, and NC State saw that and recruited me to come be a part of the team. And then when I was at NC State for 10 years, it took me about a year to figure things out and figure out what I should be doing and how do I transition mentally, really, from a city planner to an academician. And so from that point, I began to look at, well, where are there gaps? I was actually in an engineering department, and I'm an urban designer by background and trade, and urban planner. And I said, how do I use my skill set and use the background that I have to complement what they do in engineering, because I'm not an engineer. How do I complement what they do and do it in a way that I'm helping them to fill a gap? Because they hired me for a reason, and they hired me because they looked at micro scale characteristics of the built environment. And I could do that, but also understand the context and the systems and the circumstances and the connectedness of the built environment to other aspects of the built environment. And so I stayed there for 10 years and think I was successful. Then I was recruited to come here as director of the Center for Sustainable Development and Resilience. Here is the University of the District of Columbia. And once again, I started looking for how can I, or really asking myself the question, how can I be an answer to a problem? And so I began to look at areas in the college that needed improvement, in areas of where we didn't have someone to fill a position, or we didn't have a certain skill set, or I began to take on new responsibilities, never asking for additional pay or anything, although though that would have been nice, don't get me wrong, but saying, how can I be an answer to a problem? And so then about a year ago, the provost came to me and said, will you become the acting dean of the college? We need a dean. The former dean of the college is stepping down to return to the faculty. She wants to do some other things, and you're the one that we want in this position. And I thought to myself, why me? Like I actually said, there are others here. And I pointed out some others. I said, there are others. Like, please go ask them. I'm happy with what I'm doing. And I'm finally at a point where I'm comfortable and sort of settled or settling. And ultimately here I am a year and a half later. And so that's what this particular presentation will be about, is how to become an answer to a problem in this world that we live in now. And so that's an introduction of me. And so what we're going to do is the following. And this is where you'll need your writing instrument and your thought process. I will give you some guiding questions, and I'll give you our mission. And what is problem solving? Problem solving is essentially identifying an issue, looking at information, which we call data, to determine what exactly is the problem and how do these data inform that issue, and then ultimately developing solutions to address that particular issue. In the light of COVID, in light of resilience, many of us have had to pivot in a way that we had not been trained for. I personally have never been the dean of a college during COVID, when we had to almost overnight change from a mostly in-person instruction to remote instruction, and do it effectively, and also ensure that the programs have the same quality or level of quality and accrediting processes, etc. And so here are the guiding questions. I will show you a series of data. I'm only going to speak to the information. You are to ask, what do the data reveal? Number two, what does it mean? That's the interpretation, or your interpretation of it. And number three, what does it mean to you? So what? And so every time I encounter a problem and I develop a solution or solutions, I always ask myself the question, so what? And I ask that three times. So what once, so what twice, and so what three times to get to a tertiary level of understanding. Okay, so you'll do that. And then ultimately, this is the question that we'll come back and ask: how do we ensure equal access and opportunities to the district's most vulnerable populations? How do we ensure equal access and opportunities to the district's most vulnerable populations? So, once again, the process that we'll go through here is we want to look at problem solving. How do we become an answer to a problem during COVID and with an intent to enhance or improve or develop resilience? But I'm going to give you a case study, and that's from the district, from what we do here, and how do we ensure equal access and opportunities to the district's most vulnerable populations? And here we go with our statement of the problem and data. So, DC is part of the urban world, as Michael mentioned. And most of you probably know that as of 2008, more people now live in urban environments than in any other environment, meaning rural or suburban. And this trend, at least at that time and at this time, it's based on what we see and know and evidence, this trend will continue for the foreseeable future. Urban areas will continue to urbanize, and they will become these metropolitan, larger megalopolises, if I can use that term, urban environments. And you can see over the past 200 years the trend of how the United States proper has grown. Now, the United States itself has been urban as a nation for quite some time, over 80%. However, if you look at the trend here, you will see how the United States grew and became an urban environment. And there are many reasons for that, as you see this map. Part of the reasons include part of the reasons why I'm here right now in this position in Washington, D.C., because I was actually born in Manhattan, and not Manhattan, Kansas, Manhattan, well, not Manhattan, New York, Manhattan, Kansas. And most people think I was born, when I say Manhattan, they think New York. Oh, wow, you were born in the urban environment. No, I was born in Kansas, Tornado Alley. And so from Kansas, my dad was in the military. We moved several different places, including Germany as well. We lived in Germany, but um, I grew up in a more rural environment in North Carolina. And then from North Carolina, and that map should have kept going, but then from North Carolina, I grew up on the eastern part, which is the Outer Banks. And then from that point, I moved to Greenville, North Carolina, which is a larger city, about 60,000 in population. Then I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, which is a larger area, about a million in population. No, not quite a million, maybe four or 500,000. And then I moved to Washington, D.C., where our current population is over 705,000. And so what you see there is a trend of growth on my part, and how I moved from the rural environment, and quite a rural environment in Kansas, to a less rural environment, to a more urban environment, to an urban environment, to an ultra urban environment of Washington, D.C. And the trend that we see in population growth over the past few years, especially, but certainly over the past 200 years, is this increase in individuals moving to the urban environment, because many times that's where the jobs are, that's where the connection with other people are, that's where the economic opportunities and other aspects of what we consider quality of life are. And so we see people move into those environments for many reasons, not everyone, but most. And so it's in that context that UDC is situated or positioned. Michael mentioned that UDC is a land grant university, and we are. And what you're looking at here is a map of land grant universities around the nation. And what a land grant university is, or its purpose, is back in the 1800s, former President Abraham Lincoln had the idea that education should be accessible to all people, not just people that could afford to pay tuition and obtain a degree. And so from that, and I'm simplifying it, land was granted to launch at least one university in each state in the nation that would have an additional responsibility and an additional part of its mission to take education, typically non-degree, non-credit bearing education, from that institution out into the public. And so I'll give you an example. Let's say today I have my doctorate in urban design, but let's say I want to learn coding. It's very unlikely at this stage of my life, this stage of my career, and with my current educational attainment that I want to go back to college or university for 4 years or 6 years or 8 years to get a coding degree. And so a land grant university might say, well, um, maybe we could launch a program in coding and offer it to our public because there seems to be a demand for coding and it aligns with the mission of the United States Department of Agriculture, who gives us the funding to do land grant outreach, extension, we call it, and research. And so that's how it works in every state in the nation. And if you look at the pattern here, back in those days, the nation was agrarian, meaning that it was agricultural. And so most land grant universities have some emphasis on agriculture, at least that's how they started. And the nation was also growing. And so there was an emphasis on engineering, or what they call the mechanical arts. And some of the land grant universities retain some of that original nomenclature. For example, North Carolina A&T is Agricultural and Technical State University. There is Texas A&M, that is agricultural and mechanical. There are some other well-known universities like UMass Amherst, right? That's a land grant university. We have over here the Oregon State, University of California, has a land grant institution, or is a land grant institution, one of them. There's Iowa State in the breadbasket of the United States. And Penn State, also a land grant university. And so the mission on that, this is where we go to the mission. The mission of a land grant university, in our case, is to offer educational opportunities to our public, and our public in this case is the District of Columbia. And ultimately, we want to improve the quality of life of the residents of the District of Columbia, just like UMass Amherst wants to do the same and does the same in Massachusetts, and Kentucky State and University of Kentucky does that for its public in Kentucky. But here is the challenge, and I will present the data to you. Here is the challenge. That's our mission. You see the history of the world and how the world is urbanizing. You've heard some of the aspects of what a land grant university does and what we should do as our mission. And now I will present to you the statement of the problem. And so this is where I'm going to go through a series of data. And actually, I'm going to make this full screen and change my screen here. So I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment. I'm going to make this full screen, and then I'm going to go over to my other screen. So bear with me just a moment here. And so this is where you really need your writing instrument, whatever that instrument is, where you need your writing instrument so that you can begin to collect the data to determine the statement of the problem. Okay. So data from the district. You should see full screen. Is that right, Michael? Are they seeing full screen now? Statement. Your Mark. Okay, Mark is giving me the thumbs up. Michael's talking, but only to himself because his microphone's off.
I apologize.
No worries. But thank you. So statement of the problem. Now, as I go through these data, I would like for each of you to focus on 3 wards. So this is a map of the District of Columbia. DC is divided into wards, not counties. So we have 8 wards, a total of 8. UDC, the University of the District of Columbia, is located in this ward, Ward 3. So I would like for you to use that as a reference ward. And then I would like for you to use as another reference ward, Ward 7, which is where a lot of our work takes place. a ward of a vulnerable population, probably our most vulnerable ward in the district. And so Ward 3, for example, and here comes the data, the average annual income in this ward where I'm sitting right now is about 260,000 a year. Most people in this ward, most residents, I should say, of this ward have a master's degree or higher. The average income in Ward 7 is about 55,000 a year, 55,000 a year. And that income has actually decreased or been decreasing over the past few years as income in Ward 3 has been increasing over the past few years. Okay? Remember, look at the reference wards. Look at unemployment by ward, and also persons without a high school diploma. And look at those reference wards of 3 and 7. And remember, look at 3 and 7. And note this, 50% of jobs in DC require at least a bachelor's degree. And here in this ward, most residents have a master's degree, and most residents in Ward 7 um, barely have a high school diploma, or most do not have a high school diploma. So look at those reference wards. These are the data. Look at poverty. Sorry, that was quick. Look at poverty. Wards 3, focus on those two. Ward 3, where UDC is located, and focus on Ward 7, poverty prevalence. Okay. Look at the population of DC. And so most people don't realize DC at its peak was expected when it was designed, at its peak at some point was expected to max out or to have a maximum population of 350,000 people. Today, as of the most recent data, DC has a population of 705,000 people. And so at around 2000, you'll see that we were actually losing population quite significantly around the 90s. DC was considered the murder capital of the world, at least in the top 3 or so, and it was not a nice place to live or be. And a lot of people moved out of DC into Maryland and Virginia and surrounding states and territories. But then look what happened in 2000. We've had this major spike in population. And ultimately, if I were to draw a trend line here, you'll see that we've been growing overall from that point, particularly if we were to draw one here, you can see a trend line of growth. And that has occurred over time. So remember, you're collecting the data to solve a problem, to be the answer to a problem. But let's look at these data. Look at the population by race, particularly by race, and look at the changes over time from 1950 to 2017, the most recent data that we have in this format. And so look at particularly white population. I think that's white. It's much smaller on my screen. And then black, what has happened? And, and ask yourself those questions. What do the data, what are the data? What does it mean? And what does it mean to me or to us? So since 2013, there has been an 11% increase in DC's population. Now look at this. In 2012, a home price in DC was $345,000 and rent was $2,357 on average. Look what happened in 2018 when data were collected. Home price 575,000, rent 2,600. Remember, you're looking at the data here. Okay, let's go to the next one. More information about DC's population. The net worth of white households, or I prefer to say Caucasian households in DC is 8 times higher than the black households. And so think of Ward 3, which is primarily Caucasian, and then think of Ward 7, which is primarily African American. And look at the difference. Between 2007 and 2014, the median household income in DC decreased by 10,000, actually increased, not decreased, increased by 10,000, but remained flat for African American households. Most people don't realize when they think of DC, DC has the highest food assistance program use percentage in the nation. I teach a number of classes, and my students come from all over the world. And I'll ask them the first couple of classes, I'll say, when you thought of DC before you came to DC, what did you think of? What were your thoughts and perceptions of DC? And invariably, most people say the seat of power in many cases for the world. They talk about the monuments, they talk about the seat of politics, and it is the nation's capital for the United States. No one ever talks about the fact that DC has the highest food assistance program use in the nation and has such a high poverty rate in certain areas of the district. And let's look at the reference wards again. So again, we'll look at unemployment by ward and look at those two reference wards. And then let's look at the reference wards again. So food security. Let's see. So that's Ward 3. And look at the data for food security in Ward 7. The point is, more people in Ward 7 are food insecure. Look at the obesity prevalence by ward. Look at Ward 7 and Ward 3. Are you beginning to see trends here? Even life expectancy at birth on average in Ward 3. In Ward 3, mostly longer than 83 years. And look at Ward 7, mostly shorter than 70 years, or between 70 and 74 years. That's why I joined AARP. I happen to be African American, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. That's not why I joined, but I think it's a very interesting statistic. I said, well, if my life is going to be shortened by what, 13 years? Well, I may as well join now, because the 40 that I have is really, that I am, is quite a difference from the other numbers in populations. Also look at the average commute time by ward. In Ward 3, less than 25 or around 25, I'd say. And then in Ward 7, greater than 32. And Ward 7 is much more car-centric, car required. It's more difficult to get around from a transportation perspective in Ward 7, and probably a little safer in Ward 3 as well. And so here are the questions. What do the data reveal? What does it mean, your interpretation of it? And ultimately, so what? So what? Now that we know that, how do we become an answer to a problem? We know the problem. We've seen data to support that. How do we become an answer to a problem with intent to build resilience? And how do we do it in this case study for our mission, which is to ensure that everyone has equal access and opportunities, especially the district's most vulnerable populations. And so what I'm going to do is, if it is possible for Nathan or someone to put us in a breakout room, I would like for you all to go into a breakout room randomly assigned for the next 10 minutes, which will be until 4:41. And then we'll come back and discuss what you found or what you came up with as a solution in the next 9 minutes. And so Nathan, is it possible to do that?
Yes. Would the 3 rooms be okay, or how many rooms would you
3
like?
is perfect. 3 is
Okay.
fine.
All right, and I'll assign randomly.
Yes,
All right.
randomly.
Okay, opening all rooms.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, sent people should be able to join. The button is on the bottom right. Yeah, and people are joining. I think some people are probably away from their camera. Frank, are you okay?
Okay, thank you. So welcome back. So we are discussing how do we become an answer to a problem. I gave you a data set, you went through a process, and ultimately, I know that you all came up with solutions to change the world. And so I want to hear from you what you came up with based on what I shared in the short time period that you had. And then I'll give you a brief summary of some of the selected items that we are engaged in to address those problems as the University of the District of Columbia, and then we'll close it. I'll give you some principles for guiding you to become an answer to a problem, and then we'll close. And so let's start with group one, and that group had Joseph in it. And so Joseph and your colleagues, will you give us some ideas or brief summaries in like a minute as to what you came up with as a solution to the question, the problem? And your microphone is muted, Joseph, if you're the speaker. And I just called you because your name was at the top of the list, and I selected one person from the list, but anyone can speak.
I'm
Joseph?
sorry. I'm sorry. Let me change the setting.
Okay.
People should be able to unmute themselves now.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
now I can.
I
Okay.
thought Joseph was like, oh no, I can't talk. I'm sorry. I was like, Joseph, we're not going there.
No, I'm more than willing to talk.
Okay,
We
good.
didn't talk too much about kind of ways to combat it. We just kind of talked a little bit more about like how it kind of this whole entire concept of inequality stretches throughout so many different factors of daily life, basically, and like all this other sort of these factors, the gentrification and like city planning versus politics and like the sort of, development. Obviously, cities always want development versus the adverse effects that come with it, and how much are cities willing to bend to sort of accommodate growth. So we kind of, or at least I went off a little bit on that end. But I think Emily and Reef talked a little bit about how education, they had talked previously in a class about how education is like sort of a cornerstone that can be seen as like a way to counteract all of the negative effects that are seen as correlative that you gave as data in your presentation. So I think that obviously that's something I agree with. And maybe just focusing more on, providing equality to neighborhood 7 and giving the same sort of opportunities to neighborhood 7 as neighborhood 3 commonly receives, such as, distribution of food resources and, library resources, all these other sorts of little nuanced things that add up.
Okay, Joseph, thank you. Thank you very much. Anything else from anyone else in that group before we move on? That would be, remember, Emily and one other, Jennifer. Anything else? You don't have to. I'm just asking.
Rafe.
Okay. Thank you, Joseph, and group 1. Let's go to group 2. Frank Sleepers, I believe. Frank. Is Frank here? Or Frank's group?
Yeah, Frank's group. Okay.
Yeah.
So what did we come? Well, I don't know if I should. I think it's kind of out of the context here. Well, we talked about. I mean, I brought up. I think what I brought up. I brought concepts of self-identification, Jura Carter approach that at least help people who are from the neighborhood come back. They have a college degree. They were one of the few, and they're part of a population that could provide different opportunities and also to kind of get rid of the how you call it, the prejudice that poverty is a cultural thing, that people like the circumstances they live in, right? I mean, like, it's kind of a bad word, but that's a cultural value or whatever. So and I think this could Well, that's my personal opinion. We didn't discuss it, but I think this could generate new energy too within the new advocacy for better living. Maybe somebody else wants to add, because it's kind of a, well, it's a difficult topic. So I don't wanna,
Is there anything else anyone from that group would like to add before we move on?
I just put some comments in the chat, but
okay.
we were talking about counteracting gentrification in terms of creating a wider mix of housing options, addressing transit equity issues in terms of frequency and quality of service. And then, as Frank mentioned, Majora Carter's idea about building community capacity through local enterprise and community food security through community gardens, urban agriculture, and sort of reclaiming space within the community. So those would be some.
Very good. Thank you for putting that in the chat too, Mark. So thank you, Frank and Mark and that group. Mateus, were you in that group? Was it Mateus? Okay, he was in that group. I'm looking at him because he has the Brazilian flag behind him, which I also have over here, I think. Yes, I have mine over here. So that's one of my favorite places in the world. That's why I'm asking about you. Okay, thank you. And group 3, which consists of Jessica Jacobson. So someone from that group, what did you discuss?
I could go. Hello?
Please, yes.
So I think we're kind of thinking at a similar line with other groups, is providing equal opportunities to all the wards, especially in terms of investment. And there were some categories that we talked about, is providing better transportation infrastructure, then community gardens and groceries, because there's a high rate of obesity and there's only one grocery store in the lesser advantaged area. So this would not only give them access to healthy foods, but it would also create employment opportunities for the community surrounding it. Spaces that promote physical and mental well-being. It's important to provide and invest in equally in all the wards. And education, there was also a high ratio of there was this high difference in ratios of education. So maybe providing some sort of certification course to the community, which is like not 2 or 3 years long, but a couple of 6 months or 1 year. So we promote kind of people to educate themselves in whatever they're interested in. It could be for the community gardens or any courses surrounding. That's our group.
Okay, that's good. That's a good list. So let me give you a 2-minute rundown of what we did. And so how do we become an answer to a problem? Well, we can't be all things to all people, but there are some things that we have done specifically and most recently to address some of the challenges we discussed. Number one, and you've mentioned this, is we have a food truck. And so we've actually changed or pivoted our model so that our food truck is now used for distribution purposes. And so we actually have gathered a team, and our team harvests food from community gardens and from our research farm, which is about 40 minutes away from campus here. And we distribute food every Thursday and Friday to residents of Ward 7 and 8 at 2 specific locations. And so to date, since March, we've harvested and delivered over 10,000 pounds of produce from our farm systems. We've also engaged in bridging efforts to bridge the digital divide, and I'll speak to one of those in just a moment. We've held a number of virtual community engagement meetings. It's important to us to stay connected to our community, at least those that can connect to us and with us. And so we've done that. And as Kinjal, if I pronounced that correctly, mentioned, we've also developed some new targeted skill building courses that are non-credit bearing to help people to gain a new skill during this time, but also to connect them with employment opportunities that may help them. And some of those include green infrastructure, food safety, aquaponics, and hydroponics systems. And so here's a picture of our food truck. That's the former dean of the college, a picture of her, and the current president of the university and his wife. And so we actually use this food truck to harvest and distribute rather than prepare food at this particular time. And so that's been very helpful, over 10,000 pounds of produce. Um, we recently launched an initiative to provide informational access and bridging the digital divide. We've learned that a lot of people still don't have internet access, or they don't have a strong and consistent connection. And so I said, what if we actually took our digital newsletter, because most of what we do now is digital. I said, what if we converted it to a hard copy version of the newsletter and sent it to every resident of Ward 7 and 8. And so beginning on November 1, that digital newsletter that we send every month that has courses and classes and skill building opportunities, etc. We're not sure that we're reaching every resident, particularly those that are most vulnerable. And so we're going to mail this to their home, and we've budgeted for that for the next year. And so that's one way in which we're bridging the digital divide. And this is a sort of a draft copy of how our digital newsletter will be converted into a hard copy and sent to these individuals to their home. We've also offered some new opportunities that help these populations as well, the most vulnerable, no matter which race they are. But in this case, more classroom opportunities. Now, we're not doing this during COVID as much, but there is sort of hands-on opportunities, we call them, and there are more socially distanced field experiences as well that gives them opportunities to build skills in green infrastructure. And in this case, they're understanding how to work in certain labs and how to do certain analyses and training in that space as well. And then finally, I'll say that we said, how can we bring urban agriculture to the community? And so rather than asking them to go somewhere, can we build it in their backyard, so to speak? And so we've been enhancing our efforts to build aquaponics, small scale aquaponics and hydroponic systems in these communities, where we train them, we build the systems and we train them to maintain the systems, and they can become leaseholders and run these systems as businesses, grow their food and sell it to restaurants, schools, and others. And so that's our effort. Principles, guiding principles for how to become an answer to a problem, no matter what the problem is. But in this case, in the case of resilience, number one, determine the nature of the problem. We've done that. We've looked at the data, and the data show there is a problem, a trend or correlation, as Joseph said. Second, use the data and other available resources to frame the problem. Next, develop multifaceted solutions. And so everything that we've discussed here, we are in some way pursuing, but the point is that problems are usually multifaceted and comprehensive. There's not one single solution. Test and verify, in other words, what we determine might work. Does it work? Prototype, try it, see if it works. If it does, expand it and modify as necessary, and evaluate effectiveness. And so assess for continuous improvement. And that's a way of becoming an answer to a problem. And I will stop there and turn it back over to Michael. Thank you for your time, and thank you all for participating.
Dwayne, thanks so much for a great presentation. There are so many aspects of your presentation that resonate with what we do at UMass and what we're trying to do in the department and at Extension, of course, too. And the idea of the discrepancy, you know, between different parts of the city for our work in Springfield and other cities and towns around here. These are challenges that we face too. And I love the way you set up the step-by-step kind of thinking about how to approach some of these challenges. So you gave a unique presentation, and I really appreciate it. Maybe some students, since we've got a small group here hanging out, if students have questions, or anyone in the audience, maybe we can spend 5 minutes and just talking a little bit about it, if that's okay, Dwayne.
Oh, sure, that's fine. Thank you, Michael. And for Mateus here, I'll hold up my Brazilian flag so you can see my people here. You know, there you go. Order and progress, my friend. Order and progress. That's the mantra of life.
There's not much of that right now, but
it's not much of that in any part of the world. So, yes. Any questions or statements from anyone?
So I guess not so much a question, but I think something that's very important right now is how to actually reach. We talked about like how the medium doesn't always represent, you know, the most outskirt numbers. So even though the median number can represent a disadvantaged community, you don't really get the tip of the iceberg. So the thing that kind of stuck with me is like, how do you actually reach those people? So the newsletter being hard copy, that's like a unique way. And you see that being done in like other communities that are bilingual. And, you know, how do you provide bilingual services?
Good point.
So then I was just like kind of thinking, you know, there's this whole misconception that if you grow up in a disadvantaged community, when you finally make it, you want to move out. That's kind of like the whole goal. Like I made it, I moved out, you know? So in doing all this work, how important is it to have someone from those disadvantaged wards, like as almost in the forefront and in the constant discussion of like what is going on, how things are going, and kind of like speaking for those people?
Good question. I would say that it's very important to have, when I say diversity, it's not just race, but diversity of thought, diversity of understanding, backgrounds, to have those that are more seasoned and those that are probably newcomers or less seasoned. I think it's very important to have them at the table and part of the conversation because, and really from what I've learned, everyone brings a different perspective because everyone is different and they have a unique footprint. And so when we can listen to those perspectives and get to hear what other people think and how they think, I believe it provides a richer discussion, a richer opportunity to create a more inclusive process and inclusive approach to what we do. So good question. Thank you.
One question I had, Dwayne, was, you know, a lot of what we talk about is building trust and coming into a neighborhood. And sometimes we're familiar with it, but oftentimes when you make the first step, you're very self-conscious about the interface. And, you know, for me, because I'm totally self-conscious about so many things, but I had to really work in Springfield, for example, for many, many years before I felt that I had developed the trust that was kind of necessary to engage and meet with people. So I don't know how you have done it, or if you know, any of those things you've talked about, whether it's the farm or the food truck. When you think about building trust, how have you addressed that?
Good question, Michael. When we began some of our major projects, when I began here at UDC 7.5 years ago, I visited some of these communities and I would go to their community meetings, and they said a few things that stayed with me, but I'll share one. And one is they felt like they were victims of university research. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And DC, we have at least 6, 7 primary universities here in the DC area proper, just in DC, not counting University of Maryland or Virginia Tech or Virginia State, any of those. And they said, we have a lot of students and professors, they come and get information from us, but they never bring information back to us. We don't know what happened. We don't know what they did with the data. Could it help us? Is it beneficial? And they said, we just feel like victims, and we don't want to be a victim. And so I took the approach of what I learned in anthropology years ago, which is to become an ethnographer. In other words, to become one with that community as much as possible. So I began going to their community meetings to listen to what was important to them, not necessarily to provide anything at that particular time, but just to hear what's important to them, to let them know that I was a part, I wanted to understand. And while I may not live in that community, I certainly can understand and can partner with them in many ways. And so I committed to them, saying that once I learned and built relationships with them, then I took that approach and actually began to partner with them on some projects. And I said, we will always come back and share data with you, that this is not a one night stand, so to speak, but this is sort of, think of it like a marriage. This is a long-term relationship, and we'll do what we can to ensure that you have the information. If you'll share information with us, that would be helpful, and we'll continue the cycle for as long as I'm here and as long as we're in the role, and we've done that. So I think that's been one positive way of building trust. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, Dwayne, excellent talk, and I really enjoyed the interactive, collaborative component of it in terms of the breakout rooms, and rather than just doing the just standard, full-on lecture.
Thank you.
And I wanted to comment on one of the slides that you presented showed that we're in an increasingly urban and urbanizing world, and historically, there was more spatial proximity between people living in cities and towns and where they accessed their food. And often food production took place within cities and towns itself. And then over the course of the 20th century and the development of the global economy, people tended to view food as being produced somewhere else. And people living in cities did not think of food production as being part of urban life. And I think one of the things that's happening, and University of DC is a really good example of a land grant within a very urban environment, is reconnecting people with their capacity to produce food and increasing their food security and their health and well-being by sort of reestablishing that connection. And you're right that, rather than just kind of coming in and viewing these communities as the subjects of research, to see the work that you're doing as capacitating them to sort of act collectively within their communities to address these sort of issues. So instead of coming in as the expert and saying, this is what you should do, it's more kind of like, here are some potential resources and tools that would allow organizations within the community to develop some greater self-reliance, some greater economic activity, some greater creation of public spaces. And so I think urban agriculture and community gardening can serve a variety of different functions in terms of revitalizing community. So thank you.
Yes, Mark, very well spoken and articulated, and you're exactly right. Thank you, Mark. And Frank?
Yeah, Dwayne, I thought one thing was again like striking out to me, community building things. So to make the communities stronger that they are, more together, maybe one voice or different voices between. So community building process within the neighborhood working. I think that's I think that builds capacity too. That builds voices, that builds also networks and things. And of that, I mean, many other things can. So I think this was to me like a great take-home point today too. Of course, there's teaching, the digital skills, all that, but first creating this kind of feeling that, because they're not all the same, so address the diversity.
Right.
And I think that was great to see that was one of the point, and I get that burnt by the university and UMass. I mean, has some professor kind of, I don't know, I cannot tell any names because I don't know, but they don't, UMass don't always have the best reputation. The land grant university, or as university fall, but extension, when with Michael's help, they created the makerspace. They created that kind of space, and it's still, even during COVID, they still have a bike shop there. Next time you come around, you will see it. I think that's really something that creates trust. And if you keep things running, it was a pilot project, was done for only 2 months or something, projected.
Mhm.
It's 3 years old. I hope will survive COVID.
I hope so.
But
4 years old.
yeah, 4 years old, so but you had like activities there in downtown you would never seen before. On Sundays there was nothing going on in Springfield, but then you had knitting, painting, the bicycling group, you have workshops, a full calendar. You see the calendar, every day was packed, mornings and evenings and afternoons. And I also think that shows like that kind of what the community needs, and I think from there on you can grow and so yeah.
Yes, thank you. And when I first met Michael, I knew I should have gotten his autograph, but I really didn't know how famous he would become with his makerspace. And now it's too late. It's too expensive. So Frank, thank you. Points well taken from both you, Mark, and Michael, and the entire group. I've made a page full of notes here, and so I have an approach that if I don't learn something and take away something, it's not very as much beneficial to me. So thank you all. This has been a robust and positive discussion. So Michael.
Thanks again, Dwayne.
Thanks,
Great to
Dwayne.
see you.
Thank you, Dwayne.
I owe you dinner, but and everybody who hung in there, appreciate it, and have a good evening. Dwayne, we'll catch up. I've got some follow-up to do, but looking forward to talking to you soon.
Invite me to that dinner when you have it.
Yeah, well,
please
get the wine bill.
Please.
Take care, everybody. Have a good
Thank
night.
everyone. And Nathan, thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you.
Nathan.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Good night.
Thank you, Dwayne.